Subscribe now, hit like, and drop a comment. Because once you see what happens inside these walls, you won't look at prison life the same way again. You won't believe what San Quentin inmates are fed. The metal tray hit the concrete floor with a sharp clang that echoed down the tier. In the dim blue glow of fluorescent lights, every head in the unit turned. At San Quentin State Prison, sudden noises were never just accidents, they were warnings. An inmate had refused his meal. That single act froze the entire cell block, because everyone knew what refusing food really meant here. It wasn't about taste. It was about survival. Hours earlier, guards had rushed into the same unit after an emergency call crackled over the radio. An inmate lay on the floor of his cell, weak, shaking, his untouched dinner tray pushed into the corner. Officially, the report would later describe it as a medical incident. Unofficially, everyone knew this was the end result of something far more dangerous, a quiet protest against the system, sparked by what was being served behind those steel doors. San Quentin isn't just any prison. Sitting on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, it holds some of the most violent offenders in America. Men with nothing left to lose, men who live by unspoken rules more powerful than any regulation written on paper. And food, cheap, controlled, and monotonous, plays a role most outsiders never imagine. The tray that night looked harmless enough. Pale starch, overcooked vegetables, a slab of processed meat with no clear origin. But inside San Quentin, meals carry meaning. Portions can signal punishment. Timing can signal control. And refusing to eat can quietly mark someone as a problem, for both guards and other inmates. Investigators would later learn that complaints about meals had been building for weeks. Moldy bread. Undercooked beans. Trays arriving cold after long lockdowns. On the surface, these sounded like minor grievances. But inside a maximum security prison, small things become flashpoints. Tension doesn't explode all at once, it simmers. One inmate, serving a life sentence, had begun documenting everything. Dates. Menus. Reactions on the tier. He told another prisoner that the food wasn't just bad, it was breaking people down physically and mentally. Weight loss. Fights sparked over trades. Men collapsing during yard time. No one outside seemed to care. That night, when officers opened the cell to remove the fallen inmate, they noticed something else. Under the tray, scratched faintly into the concrete with a piece of plastic, were words no one expected to see. And once investigators realized what that message meant, they understood the food was only the beginning. By morning, the scratched message had already been scrubbed from the cell floor, officially erased. But inside San Quentin, nothing truly disappears. Word travels faster than paperwork ever could, and by breakfast, everyone knew something had gone wrong. The inmate who collapsed was moved to the infirmary, then quietly transferred off the tier. Guards refused to answer questions. Meals were delayed. The usual rhythm of the prison, counts, trays, yard calls, slipped out of sync. That disruption was enough to raise alarms among men who survived by reading patterns. When routines broke, danger followed. An internal review was opened, but it wasn't framed as a food issue. Instead, investigators focused on behavioral instability. That label was safer. Food complaints were messy. They led to lawsuits, media attention, and uncomfortable questions about budgets and oversight. It was easier to blame the inmates. But a corrections officer named Alvarez wasn't convinced. He'd worked San Quentin for 15 years and knew the difference between manipulation and warning signs. He'd seen men snap over less, but he'd also seen what prolonged neglect could do. When he reviewed commissary records and meal logs, something stood out. Suppliers had changed months earlier. Costs went down. Quality followed. Alvarez began talking quietly with inmates he trusted. One told him fights had doubled during dinner hours. Another admitted he'd stopped eating meat entirely after seeing how it arrived. A third said refusing meals was becoming a signal, an unspoken protest among lifers who felt they had nothing left to bargain with. Meanwhile, pressure built on the yard. Trades over food escalated into threats. A missed dessert turned into a debt. A cold tray turned into an insult. In San Quentin, disrespect was currency, and food had become the new trigger. Then came the incident the administration couldn't ignore. During evening chow, a fight broke out between two inmates near the serving line. It started over a tray swap and ended with both men on the ground, alarm screaming. One of them didn't get back up right away. Paramedics were called. Lockdown followed. Officially, the report listed it as inmate-on-inmate violence. But Alvarez noticed the timing. Same unit. Same menu. Same tension that had been building for weeks. When he pulled surveillance footage, he caught a detail no one else mentioned. Before the fight, one inmate looked directly at the tray, then shook his head slowly, as if he already knew what was coming. And buried in the kitchen records, Alvarez found a note from a supplier flagged but never addressed. A warning about nutritional deficiencies. A warning someone had ignored. By the time he brought it to his supervisor, another tray had already gone untouched, sliding back under a cell door. And this time, it wasn't because the inmate was sick, it was because he was scared of what eating might cost him. Lockdown turned San Quentin into a pressure chamber. Steel doors stayed shut longer. Yard time vanished. Meals were delivered silently. Trays slid through slots like evidence being passed in a courtroom. No one spoke unless they had to, and when they did, it was in half sentences, eyes always scanning. That's when the refusals began. At first, it was one or two trays returned untouched. Then entire rows. Guards logged it as non-compliance, but Alvarez knew better. Hunger strikes had rules. This didn't feel organized. It felt instinctive, men reacting to a shared threat without ever naming it. Inside the cells, rumors thickened. Some said the food was being used to sedate inmates. Others claimed a bad batch had already killed someone, and the truth was being buried with paperwork. The more officials stayed silent, the darker the theories became. Tension snapped during a late-night count. An inmate named Coleman, quiet, respected, someone who'd survived decades without incident, was found slumped against his bunk, unresponsive. No visible injuries. No struggle. Just a tray on the floor, barely touched. Medical staff arrived fast, but the tier already knew. Coleman had refused food for days, then finally eaten that night. The timing was impossible to ignore. Alvarez pushed harder. He bypassed internal channels and contacted a retired inspector he trusted. Within hours, copies of procurement contracts, inspection reports, and nutritional breakdowns were circulating quietly. What they showed was devastating. Calorie counts barely meeting minimum standards, protein levels cut, substitutes approved without long-term testing in high-stress environments. Food wasn't poisoning inmates, but it was breaking them. Underfed bodies reacted faster, angrier. Judgment eroded. Small conflicts ignited into violence. San Quentin had become more volatile not because of who was inside, but because of what they were being given to survive. Administration moved quickly once outside eyes got close. A temporary menu change was announced. Publicly, it was framed as a routine rotation. Privately, guards were warned to watch for retaliation. When systems fail quietly, consequences never stay quiet for long. That night, someone attacked a kitchen worker in a blind spot near storage. No fatal injuries, but the message was clear: blame had found a target. Alvarez stood in the control room, watching monitors flicker between empty corridors and locked doors. He understood then that fixing the food wouldn't undo the damage already done. Trust had been eaten away tray by tray. And somewhere in the cell block, someone scratched a new message into the concrete. Smaller this time, harder to see. It read, "Too late." The official report came out months later, buried beneath neutral language and administrative phrases. Operational shortcomings. Nutritional adjustments. No direct causal link. On paper, San Quentin had survived another controversy. In reality, nothing went back to normal. Coleman's death was ruled inconclusive, but inside the walls, the verdict had already been delivered. Inmates stopped believing anything that came from a tray slot. Guards stopped pretending food was just food. Every meal became a negotiation: eat and risk what it might do to you, or refuse and let your body weaken in a place that punishes weakness instantly. Alvarez requested a transfer not long after. It wasn't fear that drove him out, it was clarity. He'd seen how easily control could be disguised as logistics, how suffering didn't need brutality to be effective. Just indifference and budget cuts approved far from the cell blocks. Before he left, he walked past the old kitchen one last time. New menus were posted. Fresh contracts signed. On the surface, the problem had been fixed. But the walls still carried the memory. Scratches. Dents. Messages half sanded away. One of them caught his eye. "We remember." Weeks later, violence spiked again. Not riots, not headline-grabbing chaos, but precise incidents. A shove during meal distribution. A fight over traded food items. An assault that started with an argument about portions and ended with blood on the concrete. The common thread was always the same: food, or the lack of it. Outside the prison, the story faded fast. News cycles moved on. Viewers clicked away. San Quentin returned to being a name people recognized but didn't truly understand. A symbol, not a system still operating in real time. Inside, inmates adapted the way they always had. They learned which meals to avoid, which days were safer to eat, which trades might keep them strong enough to last another week. Survival knowledge passed quietly, cell to cell, more trusted than any official policy. The most dangerous thing about San Quentin wasn't the gangs, the violence, or even the food itself. It was how normal it all became. How easily a plastic tray could carry power, punishment, and neglect without anyone on the outside noticing. How control didn't always come from batons or bars, but from what you were given 3 times a day, and what you weren't. Years later, a former inmate would say in an interview, "You never forget the meals." Not because they were bad, but because every bite reminded you who decided whether you stayed strong enough to survive. San Quentin still serves food every day. And every day, the story repeats, quietly, efficiently, and just out of sight.